Hello and welcome to Buying into the Future, our podcasts where we dive into the world of public procurement. Today we'll be discussing the announced revision of the EU 2014 Public Procurement Directives, a crucial development that will shape the future of public procurement in the EU. With public buyers across the EU spending €2.4 trillion annually on purchases, and the current directives governing approximately €600 billion of this amount, the European Commission's intention to revise these directives will have major implications for public buyers, businesses, and citizens alike. The Commission seeks to simplify and modernize the existing rules to strengthen EU competitiveness and resilience. To discuss this key reform, today we have the pleasure to have with us two wonderful guests from the Directorate General for Internal Market Industry, Entrepreneurship and SMEs of the European Commission. Welcome, Nathalie Berger, Director of the Competitiveness Coordination Directorate, and welcome as well to Henning Ehrenstein, Head of the Public Procurement Unit in charge of this reform. If I can, Nathalie, I'd like to start with you for our first question and for a little bit of background. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen announced some months ago the intention to conduct a revision of the 2014 Public Procurement Directives. What prompted the need for such a revision at this particular moment, and what are its main goals?
Well, thank you for bringing this question. You mentioned it yourself. The public authorities spend across the European Union over 2.6 trillion euros annually on the purchase of services, works and supplies. And this accounts for around 15% of the EU GDP. Around 1/4 of the total procurement value is subject to EU rules, and it is published in TED, which is the EU Tenders Electronic Daily. This amounts to around 600 billion euros, which amounts to around 3 times the size of the budget of the European Union. And you certainly can keep in mind the statements made by Mr. Draghi when he published his report on the needs for investment in the European Union, needs for public investments of above 750 to 800 billion euros. And last year, the ECB mentioned a need for above 1,200 billion euros a year. So that's a broad element of context. Now, to go really into the public procurement framework, the public procurement framework, and I mean the public procurement directives, have been adopted in 2014. So since then, a long time has passed with important technological evolutions and innovation. And this is plenty of time to reflect the way that this regulatory framework has fulfilled its objective and to what extent this regulatory framework is still fit for purpose in the public procurement of today. In addition, we are in a completely different context than 10 years ago. We see new priorities, a strong need to reboost the competitiveness of the European Union, concerns on economic security, strategic autonomy of the European Union, and very worrying geopolitical developments. So it is time to act. Public procurement needs to be part of an efficient public investment strategy. And for this, we have observed, assessed that there is a real need for simplification, so to make procedures less complex, faster, more flexible for public authorities, a need for digitalization, so develop easy-to-use digital tools to increase efficiency and transparency, and a need for a really genuinely coherent legal framework. Second, public procurement must play a role in strengthening the economic security and the sovereignty of Europe. For this, we're looking into the development of a vision of Made in Europe as President von der Leyen announced it in the speech on the State of the Union in September, in which public procurement stimulates demand for European industrial leadership. It strengthens our competitiveness and ensures that European products and technologies are promoted whenever possible. And third, it is important to broaden the focus beyond price only. This is, of course, linked to the concept of economic security and strategic autonomy of the European Union. So contracting authorities should be better enabled to consider the long-term economic benefits of their purchases and contribute to EU strategic goals, primarily in three areas: environment, social, and innovation policy.
Henning, if I could go to you, talking a little bit now about the kind of evaluation process of the directives. In order to prepare for this revision, the Commission has conducted a comprehensive evaluation of the current public procurement legislative framework. And this has resulted in a detailed report of nearly 300 pages. Would you be able to summarize the key findings and the takeaways from this evaluation and how they will inform the revision process?
Well, look, of course, the evaluation of the existing legislative framework is a key input for the reform. It shows what works and what doesn't work. And based on 10 years of implementation experience, there's a lot of knowledge out there in the public buyers and in the communities about this. So the evaluation report really is the basis for our revision in many ways. By and large, the evaluation shows that the objectives as they were set over 10 years ago were partially met. Let me give you some examples. On the objective to have simpler and faster procedures, clearly the introduction of e-procurement has significantly contributed to an increase in the transparency and openness of procedures. The number of published call for tenders EU-wide has doubled over the period. At the same time, there has been no consistent decrease in the length of procedures, where the evidence is mixed depending on the procedure we are talking about. And also, the introduction of a larger variety of procedures designed to cater for different circumstances has in reality only led to limited flexibility. And we see that in 82% of all calls for tenders, the open procedure is used, whereas some other procedures introduced in 2014 actually rarely used in practice. So we see also that within the procedures, there is limited flexibility for public buyers and economic operators in practice. Moving on to the level of competition, of course, always a key objective of any procurement policy to have a good competition in the calls for tenders. Here, overall, over the period, the number of bids per procedure actually fell from 5.4 to 3.4. But we have to differentiate in terms of the value of calls for tenders, and in high value tenders, we see a continued strong interest by economic operators with an average of 9.2 bids for those. An important objective at the time was also to facilitate the participation of SMEs in procurement procedures, and the evaluation shows that by and large SMEs are doing well in participating in calls for tenders and winning awards. Their share is in line with the overall share they take in the European economy. Coming to cross-border competition within the EU, so between our 27 member states, we see this stagnating at around 4% of contracts that are awarded to bidders that are established in another member state. That is direct cross-border participation. What we do see is a significant increase in the indirect cross-border participation, which stands at around 20%, reflecting complexity of value chains, corporate structures, as well as subcontracting as well. When it comes to the non-EU participation in EU procurement procedures, so the participation of economic operators from outside the Union, we see strong concerns in the market in Europe over this, especially in strategic sectors. Talking strategic, a main innovation of the 2014 reform was the introduction of strategic policy objectives that could be pursued through public procurement, namely the green procurement, social procurement, innovation procurement. These were main innovations at the time. And the evidence is that the uptake is somewhat uneven between these three and between member states, but in particular, the uptake of green, of environmentally sustainable solution has been rather significant at around 25% of all contracts awarded have in part been awarded to green criteria. That figure is lower for social responsible procurement and for innovation procurement as well. There's overall concerns over the consistency and coherence of the legislative framework at European level as a result of the introduction of procurement provisions in numerous sector-specific acts, for example, on but not only green procurement, which has added further complexity to procurement procedures for public buyers. And I'm sure many in our audience are very much aware of this. When it comes to strengthening the governance framework of procurement, apart from the increase of transparency that we have achieved successfully through the introduction of electronic procurement, there continue to be important data gaps and issues over data quality, which make it difficult for policymakers and authorities to monitor compliance with procurement rules and also to ensure a strategic political direction of procurement. So this continues to be a shortcoming.
Natalie, if I could, I'd like to return to something that you kind of touched on in your introduction. The EU's economic security and strategic autonomy have become increasingly important priorities, particularly in light of recent geopolitical developments. Should therefore public procurement be leveraged to support the security and sovereignty of the EU economy and industries? Is it time to consider a European preference in public procurement?
Times are tough. And so when considering the public procurement reform, we need to look at it not only from the point of view of the rules to facilitate access to the systems, etc., but we also need to situate public procurement as a part of a wider element and a wider strategy. President Ursula von der Leyen mentioned it, as I mentioned it before in her State of the Union speech in September at the European Parliament, that the Commission would introduce Made in Europe criteria in public procurement and for strategic products. Executive President Séjourné, when he visited the European Parliament, has underlined the enormous potential of public procurement as part of the European investment strategy to boost the competitiveness of the European Union, but also the resilience and the economic security. And I also referred to the Draghi report earlier on, but I could also mention the report by Enrico Letta on much more than a market, single market, much more than a market. Both highlighted the need to make better use of public procurement to support the European single market, to strengthen the competitiveness and to promote strategic autonomy and sustainability. So we are indeed looking into this. We are looking into how to integrate this in the general framework of public procurement, whilst, of course, not creating additional burdens for the public authority. But this is a very timely subject to consider in the framework of our work on economic security.
Henning, if I could turn back to you now as we look at the process the directives are going through at the moment, simplifying the legal framework is a stated goal of the revision. What specific measures are being explored to simplify the public procurement legal framework?
Yeah, look, a lot of feedback has reached us from the market calling for a simplification. And that is, of course, in line also with the overall Commission objective to avoid any administrative burden, whether that is for public buyers or for economic operators. So it is clear that we want to look into giving more space for negotiations in procurement procedures. We will want to look at how we can facilitate dialogue with the market, at simplifying procedures, in particular for off-the-shelf purchases of standard supplies. We will also want to see how we can allow for contract modifications or corrections, and whether this is useful. There is a lot of stakeholders that have raised points on joint procurement and how this could be facilitated, for example, by networks among buyers, or enhancing the role of central purchasing bodies, as well as, of course, by simplifying the rules for setting up joint procurement structures. When it comes specifically to SMEs, we will look into how we can further encourage the division of contracts into smaller lots, but also into the formation of consortia for SMEs. I think whatever the economic operators, whether it's small, medium, or large companies, there is a significant call to try to reduce the documentation requirements. So we will look into how we can allow for the reuse of documentation submitted by bidders. In this context, we will also explore whether we can further develop the Tender Electronic Daily European system for the publication of call for tenders into a true EU public procurement marketplace or platform.
And as we discuss simplification, of course, things are becoming much more digitalized these days. So digitalization is a tool that can play a major role in making public procurement processes more efficient, transparent, and simpler. How do you envision the role of digitalization in the context of the revision, and what benefits do you think can be expected from changes in this area?
Evidently, we live in a different technological environment today and have different technological possibilities than those that existed more than 10 years ago. So looking into how and to what extent we can make use of new IT possibilities is, of course, going to be a key avenue that we will look into in preparation of the reform. And we will see to what degree we can, at European level, create a more integrated digital procurement marketplace that facilitates the publication of call for tenders EU-wide beyond what we have in the tenders electronic daily system today, but goes beyond that to see if it would be useful to have an integrated marketplace, not only for the call for tenders, but also for the submission of bids and the documentation required for this, as well as the award of contracts and subsequent monitoring. So a more comprehensive system that, of course, would be a very important and not easy to implement project, but we want to assess what the costs and benefits of this would be, as we see in many member states the creation of national central public procurement marketplaces already, and at least networking them and making them interoperable and integrating them would, of course, facilitate the cross-border participation in calls for tenders, and could potentially significantly contribute to a reduction of administrative burden for economic operators. But these are the kinds of things that we will want to assess as part of the forthcoming impact assessment, which will prepare the Commission proposal, and we will have to see what the costs and benefits of these different options would be.
To take a slightly different tack now, the 2014 public procurement reform aimed to encourage the incorporation of green and social aspects into public procurement, aligning with broader EU policy objectives. So how can green and social public procurement be further integrated, do you think, into procurement practices?
Yeah, so the integration of strategic procurement was really a main innovation of the 2014 reform, and a lot of progress has happened since then. And I think we need to start by emphasizing this and of the significant consideration that many public buyers give to sustainable and innovation procurement, to green, environmentally friendly solutions, to socially responsible procurement. At the same time, we see that the uptake of strategic procurement differs significantly between public buyers and also member states. So there is a lot that we can still learn from each other, and there is a lot that we can do to support public buyers in procuring socially, environmentally responsible. Often there is the perception on the side of public buyers that the legislation is not always very clear, or that they open themselves to a risk of legal challenges when moving beyond price only award of public contracts. And it has to continue to be our objectives to make strategic procurement possible, to facilitate this, to work with the public buyers and encourage them to make this possible. So as part of this reform, we will assess different options, how we can facilitate and enable the green social innovation procurement by public buyers. And we will also assess whether in some cases we should introduce mandatory provisions mandating, obliging the award of green or socially responsible solutions. So this will be some of the bits that we have to look into. There is, of course, a very vivid interest by the stakeholder community in these questions. And as part of the open public consultation in preparation of our proposal at the moment, we look to receive further input from stakeholders on this.
If I could bring Natalie back into the conversation and look a little bit about the impact that this reform will have on a, if you like, on a practical level. How will the outcome of the revision of the public procurement directives affect the daily work of public buyers across Europe? And of course, what might the impact be on citizens?
In Henning's words and mine, you could see that one of the main objectives of this reform is to bring simplification and a more coherent regulatory framework. So we really hope that public buyers will definitely benefit from the simplification of this regulatory framework. We will have a simpler, faster, and more transparent framework that will benefit the contracting authorities by reducing the administrative costs, and then this will enable them to make a more strategic use of public procurement and to increase the efficiency in the overall procurement process. We believe that having at their disposal easy-to-use digital tools will also facilitate their day-to-day work. And citizens will benefit as well by having access to improved public goods, products and services and better value for money. This reform will contribute to ensure that taxpayers' money is used wisely, with increased transparency and accountability mechanisms, and this should also contribute to boosting confidence in public authorities, which is needed in today's environment. Last but not least, if I may also add a word on the expected consequences of the reform for the businesses, we also aim to facilitate SMEs' access to public procurement. So generally speaking, a faster, simpler, more efficient framework for all.
Talking of citizens, as you've touched on that, is there a way that citizens can provide input to the Commission during this revision process?
Absolutely, yes. And for this, the European Commission has opened a 12-week public consultation seeking input and evidence on how EU procurement rules can be improved. This is a call for interest. So we have a public questionnaire that is available on the Have Your Say portal, and it covers both general and technical aspects. We also have published a call for data, studies, and any other type of supporting evidence. This public consultation will run until the 26th of January 2026. and all the feedback collected will contribute to the preparation of a legislative proposal that is announced for Q2 2026.
It's good to know. Thank you very much for that. As we bring this to a close, I'd just like a few words from both of you. Forgive me for being old-fashioned. I'm going to start with ladies. So, Natalie, if you wouldn't mind, in a few words, what lasting impact do you hope that the revised public procurement directives will have on public procurement policy and practice in the EU over the next decade?
I would say a top world level system of a framework for public procurement, in a sense that it should be fast, simple, easily accessible, digital, benefit public authorities, benefit public buyers, of course, and those who are going to want to contribute to public procurement. And on a wider scale, something that is going to contribute to boost European competitiveness.
Thank you very much. Henning, if I could ask for some final words from you on the same subject.
Look, I think our objective would be to make public procurement part of an efficient EU investment strategy by ensuring, on the one hand, the best possible value for taxpayers' money, by avoiding administrative burden for all involved, and by supporting our strategic policy objectives, such as Europe's economic sovereignty and our very important continuous sustainability objectives as well.
Well, thank you very much. And let's hope that both your hopes for this revision come to fruition. And there we have to end today's podcast. I would like to thank both our guests for their time today and for their very, very valuable insights. It's been very interesting, and we look forward to seeing how these revisions will ultimately manifest themselves. For the listeners, thank you very much for joining us today. Please check out our other podcasts in the playlist, and we look forward to you joining us another time. So goodbye for now.